Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Adrian and I am a nursing student at Chamberlain University. Today's video I wanted to talk about my simulation and clinical experiences. So at Chamberlain, once you reach fundamentals patient care, that is the session that you begin your clinicals. So your first set of clinicals. So when you do clinicals, you have one simulation and 3 clinical days. That's how it was for me. Sometimes they do 8-hour clinicals, and so because you have 8-hour clinicals, you might have more clinicals in a session, but typically you'll have 1 simulation and 3 clinicals. But it depends on the length and the hours of the clinicals that you're gonna have. It also depends on where you're gonna have your clinicals. Each clinical site is gonna be different and they're gonna have their own, I don't know, I guess requirements for clinicals. We were very lucky, I have to say, we were very lucky to actually get to go to clinicals because of COVID and because of the pandemic. Previous sessions and previous students had to experience doing virtual clinicals, which is not fun. So for us, we were kind of worried about clinicals and whether or not we were actually gonna get to go or not, but we ended up going. And so we were very lucky to have that experience. So getting our clinical set up, we received an introductory email from our clinical instructor, and then we received information about our simulation, which was going to occur first before our clinicals. We received information on that, and then of course we also received information on where we were going to go to clinicals, what hospital we were going to, and all the important information about the hospital, including we had in virtual orientation from the hospital for us to familiarize ourselves with the hospital system and their policy. So we actually had like a virtual meeting with this lady who was she was part of the education team at the hospital, and she was giving us information about you know, clinicals at that hospital we were going to. So we did all of that. So for me, my simulation and my clinicals, for me, they occurred later in the session. My classmates who had in their clinical groups, they actually had simulation and clinicals earlier in the session. I had them later in the session, which is kind of weird. Everybody, like I had classmates who were already going to clinicals and they were like, when do you go to clinicals? And I was like, I go to clinicals next month. And it was just weird, but that's how it works. So yes, you do have a clinical group. So there's a group of students that you were with. My clinical group, I think we were like 8 people. There was like 8 of us, I think. And there were people in my class and people in other classes as well. I think they had other teachers as well. So yeah, there was 8 of us. So the 8 of us, we were all gonna do simulation together, and then we were all gonna do our clinicals together. As the session went on, finally the simulation day was upon us, and simulation is 12 hours and it's on campus in the and it takes place in the simulation rooms that exist on campus. So on campus you will see that there is a room that basically looks like a hospital ward or a hospital room, and in these rooms there are patients, which are mannequins, robotic mannequins, and on the wall there is a reflective glass you know, window, and on the other side your clinical instructor and the other instructors in clinicals, or the other instructors that are there on simulation day, they will be controlling the mannequin to speak and to do all sorts of things, make sounds and all of that. So before simulation, we received an email from our clinical instructor, and she was pointing us towards some files to prepare us for our simulation. So simulations, they will give you a specific scenario of like, basically they will give you a specific scenario that you and 3 other students, usually it's usually 4 people that are put into a group to go into simulation first. So you and your other classmates go into the patient's room and you are given a simulation, a specific situation that you and your classmates have to work through. And it involves you using your critical thinking skills, your communication skills, your assessment skills, and all of those things. And so now there was 4 people that went first in simulation day. So we got to school, we got there, we had to be there by 7, so we had to be there bright and early at the campus. I almost said the hospital, but we had to be there by like 7, you know, on campus. And so we met our clinical instructor in person. And the funny thing was that we were actually kind of relieved because like the introductory email for our clinical instructor, she seemed really intimidating, and like the way her email, the introductory email was set up, it was like she seemed like a mean person or like a mean, strict professor. So we were kind of scared and kind of intimidated to meet our clinical instructor. But then in real life, like when we met her in person, like she was actually really, really sweet and very supportive and encouraging. And so we were kind of relieved, like, oh, she's not what we think she was. Like, she's actually really nice. And she was an incredible instructor, very informative and knowledgeable. She was a nurse practitioner and she was working with the school as a clinical instructor, and she was going to be with us for clinicals. So yeah, she was very nice. And so they took us to a conference room. It was like a small conference room with a long table, and we had our papers ready for our clinical simulation, which had all the information on our patient that we were going to be doing simulation on. And we basically got a briefing on the patient, and we got report on the patient the same way nurses give report to each other in real life. So we got report on the patient, and then our clinical group was split in half. So one group first went to the simulation room, and the rest of us stayed behind in the conference room, and there was a TV in the room, and we could see our other clinical group on the TV. So in the simulation room with the patient, there is a camera and a microphone set up on the ceiling. And so we stayed behind and we actually watched our classmates on TV going through their simulation. And so we were like, of course, like we were in there, we were laughing, you know, because it is a nerve-wracking thing. Like, we were all nervous. So obviously, like, our nerves really showed when we took turns doing simulation, and we were just kind of laughing. And our job, as we were watching our classmates, was to you know, critique them and give them constructive criticism on their simulation. And so that's what we did. But we were in there laughing, like. But the first group that went and did their simulation, they actually did amazing. They did really, really well, and we were very impressed. So the simulation, I want to say, I don't remember how long the simulation took. It wasn't very long. I really don't remember how long the simulation actually took. But the first group went first, and they went through the simulation. The clinical instructor and another technician, you know, they were controlling the mannequin and they were speaking. So one of the technicians who was like operating the mannequin, they were also like doing the voice and like speaking as the mannequin or as the patient. And they were amazing. They could have been like easily be like a voice actor or something. And they were really, really funny. And so it kind of like eased the nerves of the simulation. So the first group went, they came back into the conference room, and then we all discussed all together. We kind of gave them our constructive criticism and what they could have done better, and then we took a little break. And then after our break, me and the rest of our other students, it was our turn to go into simulation and do the simulation. And we were nervous, like, and to be honest, like, I remember our simulation, but at the same time, I don't remember very much because honestly, I was so nervous. Me and my classmates, we were so nervous. We were so nervous, but we did the best of what we could with what we knew. And the thing about simulation, I think that's really important about simulation, is that simulation is the place where you want to make mistakes. It's a place where it's okay to make mistakes. You know, there shouldn't be any pressure to be perfect or anything like that. Like, this is the place where you want to make mistakes. This is not the place where you have to expect yourself to be perfect. In the end of simulation, we kind of go through and discuss what could be better, and it's a learning experience for everybody, regardless of who goes to the simulation first or which group goes first or last or whatever. Like, it's a whole learning experience for all of us. So we went through the simulation the first time. The simulation began, and we began the process of talking to our patient. I'm not sure if I can give details on the patient. I'm not really sure, but what I will say is that we had a patient. There was charting given to us, so we were looking and flipping through their charting and looking at what medications they were taking. And so I think we had different roles, and I was the assessment nurse. I decided to volunteer myself to be the assessment nurse. So my job was to go to the patient and communicate with them and talk to them, and it was my job to go through an assessment. And so I went through and I did a head-to-toe assessment on the patient, and I remember listening to their lung sounds and noticing that they had some adventitious lung sounds in their lungs, and so that was one of the things that I stated that I got as information. And so that information ended up being relevant to the patient and what we ended up doing in our simulation. And so the simulation was like, when I remember, like, we were nervous, and it was like, we thought we did bad. That was the thing. Like, we thought we were doing so bad because we were so nervous, and like, there were things that we were like, what do we do? You know, we were kind of like freaking out, like, internally. But we pulled it together and we solved whatever issues, and we had to intervene, and we intervened whenever we had to. And like I said, I don't even remember how long the simulation was, but it was over as soon as it started, and we went back to the conference room, and our other classmates, we walked in and they were like clapping, like applauding us, and they were saying that we did really, really well. And it was like, we thought we did bad. Like, we thought we sucked, but turns out we did really, really good. Oh, and the thing about simulation is that when you go back to the room after your simulation, you get to watch yourself on the recording from the camera and the microphone that's in the room. So you actually get to watch yourself on screen go through the whole simulation, and so it's actually really funny. It's funny to see yourself. Like, it's embarrassing, but it's funny, and it's an educational experience. And our clinical instructor and all of us, we talk about how our simulation went, what went well, what could be improved, and so on. And so the beginning of our simulation day, that's really what it consisted of, was our first simulation. And then we had a second simulation, and the second simulation involved another patient with a whole nother diagnosis and a case. And so we had to discuss, and we went through our reports for our second patient. And So we did the whole simulation process again with a different patient. And so we had 2 groups of students go first into the simulation and go through the whole simulation. And then we got to come back, re-watch them go through the whole simulation on TV. And then we had our second simulation group go. And so yeah, we basically went through the whole simulation process again. And so the whole time going through 2 simulations, I want to say it took almost half of the day. I don't exactly remember how long it took. I don't really have a sense of time when it comes to these types of things. So, but yeah, that's really what simulation day consisted of. And so after the second simulation was done, we took a break. We went to eat lunch. You know, we all brought our own food, and so yeah, we all had lunch together and we all talked and convened in school. And then the rest of the day that we had was going to be spent taking time to learn more skills. And so I've mentioned in the past that in fundamental skills is where you learn a whole bunch of different skills. On simulation day, we had the opportunity to learn more skills. We had the opportunity to kind of relearn skills that we already learned, but we got to learn new skills. And on simulation day, we learned how to insert IVs, which was a skill that wasn't taught to us in fundamental skills. I'm not sure why. And actually, something interesting I learned was that a lot of nursing schools don't teach putting in IVs anymore. I don't know why. It's a really weird thing, but apparently a lot of nursing schools don't necessarily teach nurses or nursing students to put in IVs. It's something that people learn on the job, and it's something that people learn in clinicals and stuff. But we actually got to learn how to put in IVs on simulation day. And so our clinical instructor actually taught us the steps, and we all had a mannequin arm, and we all one by one practiced putting in IVs. And so I think I might have a picture of my IV that I put in, that I put together. And it was a really, really cool experience to do that. We learned various methods of passing medications, injections. We also got to play around with the IV drip machines and how to calibrate them. And we learned a whole bunch of skills, and that was really kind of the rest of the day. That's really what we spent doing, was practicing and learning all these new skills. And so sure enough, simulation day was over, and yeah, 12 hours went by, and it actually kind of went by pretty quick. And yeah, that was pretty much it. That was simulation day. I don't remember what else we did. I can't remember what else we did after that, but yeah, it was pretty fun. And it was pretty fun to be with my classmates, and it was a really enjoyable experience to actually get to, you know, be hands-on and put our knowledge out and use our critical thinking skills. And so yeah, it was a pretty fun day. And so simulation day counts as clinical hours. So in our session, the total number of hours that we had to have for clinicals was 48 hours. And so with simulation day, our first 12 hours was complete. So our simulation and clinical days were going to be set on Sundays. And so on Sunday we had our simulation, and so then the next Sunday we were gonna have our first clinical at the hospital. And so our clinical instructor, you know, gave us information about that, and she told us, next Sunday, I'll see you at the hospital bright and early at 6 a.m. We had to be there by like 6 something before our clinicals, and we had to meet her in the lobby of the hospital. And yeah, so the next week came, and it was Sunday, and we were of course like really nervous and excited for our first clinical. So the day of clinical, I woke up super early to get ready, and then I drove all the way to the hospital. I parked, and we got into the hospital lobby waiting for our instructor. And so then our first clinical, our instructor came and she made sure that we had all of our forms and all of our documents. So it's very important for simulation and clinicals, and especially clinicals, it's very important that you have your documents ready. And so some of the documents that you need to have, there's a clinical learning evaluation document that you need to have. You need to bring this with you to every clinical. There's also another document that you can bring with you. I don't remember if it's required or not, but there's an ISBAR document that you have to bring with you. Everything for clinicals, all the documents for clinicals that you're gonna need, they will provide you with those documents, and as a student it's your responsibility to print out those documents and bring them with you. So it's very important that as soon as you get a hold of, you know, the documents that you need, that you print them out and bring them with you. So it's very important to not forget that when you go to clinicals. So our clinical instructor, she gathered us up in a group huddle or whatever, and she basically said, okay, you two are gonna go to this floor on this unit, you two are gonna go to this floor in this unit. So for me and my first clinical, me and one other of my classmates, we were gonna go to the same unit. For my first clinical, I went to an orthopedic oncology unit, which is basically like med-surg. It was basically a med-surg unit. So our clinical instructor went and she kind of dropped us all off in the hospital and made sure that we were in the right place and that we were basically settled into our units. And so of course we were nervous as usual, and the nurses there were like, it's fine, you're gonna do great, you know, have fun, ask questions, all of that. And so finally, when we began our clinical day, we were assigned to our nurse. And I have to say, my nurse for my very first clinical, my nurse was absolutely amazing. She was incredible. Like, I cannot say enough about how amazing she was. She was super sweet. She was so funny. She is a very established nurse. Like, she had been a nurse for a long time. She was very funny. She was very informative, educational, and she really loved to teach. And it really showed. So we started, and the first thing we did was get reports on our patients. And so I kind of followed her, and I was like, you know, taking notes. And so getting report on patients, it's very important that you take notes on that as well, because our clinical instructor told us, she's like, I'm gonna be making my rounds to all of you individually. At some point in clinical, I'm gonna sit down with you and I want you to give me reports on all of your patients, which did end up happening. So it's very important that when you're going through your clinical, that you're taking notes, you're getting all the information you need, and of course asking your nurse about the patients as well, and getting information and kind of putting together an ISBAR for all of your patients. So you can give a brief report to your instructor. So we got report on all of our patients, and then the day started, and I went with my nurse and we started handing out medications. She was doing assessments, and I basically got to watch her do a whole bunch of things, and then she let me do certain things. I got to mix medications. I got to pass out medications as well, or, you know, help her pass out medications. And I basically, the first clinical day, a lot of it was really just observation. It was just observing, and I feel like, you know, through observing, you still learn a whole lot. I know I definitely did. So for our clinicals, we had 3 clinical days after our simulation day, and between our first and our third, or our last clinical day, we had to, as students, as part of our grade, or as part of our credit for our clinicals, we had to demonstrate a full head-to-toe assessment. So we could either do it our first clinical day or our second clinical day or our last one. So for me, and I recommend for all of you to do this, it's very important to review your head-to-toe assessment. Review your head-to-toe assessment before clinicals, because they will ask you to do it eventually. And I had to do my head-to-toe in front of my instructor on a real patient, which is kind of nerve-wracking. So yeah, it's very important that you review your entire head-to-toe. And so when you're doing your head-to-toe, you actually have to call out and say what you're doing, so that your instructor can hear you and kind of, grade you. But she's not really grading you, but she is evaluating your head-to-toe. So before my first clinical day, that's what I did. I reviewed my head-to-toe, refreshed it, and I actually brought my head-to-toe notes with me to clinicals. And so I told my clinical instructor when I saw her, when she came to see me, she was like, I want to do my head-to-toe assessment today, just to get it over with and to get it done. And she was like, okay. So for my head-to-toe assessment, I told my instructor which patient I wanted to do my head-to-toe on. And so we went and I did my head-to-toe, and I did really, really well. Yeah, so I went through the entire head-to-toe, and I really, going through a head-to-toe is very robotic for me. Like, I just do it. The patient was very responsive to all of it, and I got through the entire assessment, and I called out all of the nerves, all of the cranial nerves that we learn in head-to-toe assessment. And I got to the very last nerve and I forgot the name, and I was just like, and it was kind of embarrassing because, like, I'm with the patient and I'm in front of my instructor, and and I just kind of had to forget about it. But I finished my whole assessment and I was done. And in the end, my clinical instructor said that I did really, really well. And it was all really, really good. So then I had to went back and I was like, oh, the 12th nerve, that's the hypoglossal nerve. Like, of course, like, that's the one nerve, the name that slipped out of my mind. But it was all good. And so for my first clinical, my instructor she kind of checked off that I completed my full head-to-toe assessment. So yeah. So I just went and got it over with. My classmates were really nervous and they didn't want to do it on their first clinical, which is fine. But for me, I just went and got it done, and I just went over it and just got it over with. And like I said, I actually brought my head-to-toe notes and papers, my head-to-toe, basically my head-to-toe notes with me on clinical. So whenever I had the opportunity, I could just kind of review and refresh my head-to-toe before I went to do it. Clinical day, I want to say, like, we had day shifts, and for the med-surg unit that I was on with my nurse went through all of the patients, assessment, medications, all of that, and then I had the opportunity to just kind of sit down and go through my IS bars and fill them out. And as students, we actually have access to the computer system for the hospital to actually access our patient charting, but we could only view it as a student. So we couldn't actually change information on the charting, but we could just look at it. Which was really helpful because that helped us with our IS bar and our care plans. So we do have care plans that you have to do for clinicals. So you do have care plans that you have to do for clinicals, and so you get all of your information together. And then the rest of the clinical day went on, and I was with my nurse doing different things. I got to participate in doing bed baths and cleaning patients, and a lot of basic nursing skills as well, which is wonderful to learn. And all in all, I had an amazing day. And like I said, I could not have had a better nurse. Just the absolute most amazing nurse, and she gave me lots of advice. And of course, for clinicals, like, I asked her a lot of questions about, you know, whether or not she likes working at that hospital and for that particular hospital system. And that's a very important thing that you should do, is to ask people like, hey, do you like working here? Because eventually when you graduate, you're gonna have different options and opportunities to work as a nurse and, you know, select which hospital or which hospital system you wanna work for. And my nurse told me that they liked working there. And I feel I got the impression that a lot of the other nurses there also really liked working there as well. So that's a really good thing. And yeah, I went through my first clinical day. It was really, really great. I hugged my nurse. I was like, thank you so much. You were amazing. You were awesome. And so at the end of the day, we all grouped together. So like, our clinical day was really like 11 hours, I want to say. The last hour of the day, we all had to come down, all the students, everybody in my clinical group, we all had to come down and meet our clinical instructor. We had to have our, you know, documents signed, our clinical learning evaluation signed. And so my nurse actually left me a comment on my document. She said, Adrian is doing well, asking great questions and providing great patient care. He's taking great initiative during clinical. So yeah, that was my first note, my first nurse. And so, like I said, she was amazing. And so we all met down, me and my classmates, and we all kind of shared something interesting we got to experience, and we all just kind of, you know, debriefed, and we all got to kind of talk and share our experiences, and our clinical instructor gave us some information and some other things, and then after the hour was done, right at 7, we were pretty much done and we went home. So that was my first clinical day. My second clinical was back in the same hospital, and for my second clinical, me and one of my classmates, we ended up going to a unit that's called the clinical decision unit. Other hospitals, they call it an observation unit. And so this unit was really different. It was quite different. The CDU, it's basically like an extension of the ER. So a lot of the patients that were in that unit, they had come from the ER. And basically what an observation unit is, or what a CDU is, it's basically a unit that patients go when they come through the ER, and they stay in that unit to be observed. And basically those patients get tested to basically so that they can figure out what's wrong with those patients and where else they're gonna go. And so all of the patients that we had, they all had a diverse problems, like all kinds of different cases and diseases and stuff. And all of the patients that were there, you know, getting tested. And once they got results back for whatever tests or whatever diseases they may have or whatever, then they would be taken to other places in the hospital, wherever else. The nurse that I had for my second clinical, he was really, really great. He had a very, very different personality than the first nurse I had, but he was still a really, really great nurse. Like, he had a very dry, sarcastic sense of humor. He kind of reminded me of Dorothy from the Golden Girls. Like, that was his personality. Like, but he was funny, and he was still very educational, and I learned a lot from him. And we kind of started our day off, and you know, he passed meds, and we spent time, yeah, cleaning patients, doing stuff like that. And we started our day off, and I got all the information I needed for, you know, my care plan and ISBAR and things like that. The thing that was interesting though, for him was that he went through his day, and then after that he was pretty much done with his, I guess, morning's duties. And he really just sat and started charting and And so he actually recommended me to go with another nurse in clinical. And this nurse, she was working on that unit as a tech. So she was a nurse, but she was working on the unit as a tech because the unit had a shortage of techs. And so she was going around taking vitals, and she was like, you know, you can go with her and, you know, basically practice skills and learn from her. And so I ended up going with her for half of the day, pretty much. And so I got to practice, you know, taking vitals on patients, which was really good practice. That plus I got to practice, you know, taking care of patients, cleaning them, and basically doing tech duties. And the thing about this unit and the thing about nursing in general is that everybody works together. You know, techs, nurses, everybody is hands-on, everybody helps each other. So it was really, really a great experience to learn all of the different things that we had to do. So, and she was a wonderful nurse, very helpful, very educational. And then after that, I spent some time with her, and then I sat down and, you know, filled out the paperwork that I had to fill out, and that was pretty much it. I want to say that this second clinical, it wasn't as eventful as the first clinical. I really got to do just basic things, but either way, it was still a great clinical day. And I want to say that for my second clinical, I definitely felt more confident than the first clinical. So, you know, getting into my second clinical, you know, I felt more confident than the first one, and I felt like I communicated with patients more, and I wasn't as like afraid, you know, the second time, which is a good thing. Like it really makes a difference, like your clinical hours, in my opinion. So yeah, we went through the whole clinical day, and you know, the same as the first day, the same process and everything. And yeah, that was it. And then I swear it was the craziest thing. That night after my clinical, I had one more clinical left to do. I went home that night after my second clinical, and I went to bed, and here in Texas, we had a cold front come through. And for me, I slept with my fan on, and I woke up the next day, Monday morning, and I could feel like my sinuses were stuffy. And I was like, I'm gonna get sick. Like, I knew it. And sure enough, I ended up getting a really nasty sinus infection. And I was sick the entire week. So from Monday all the way to Sunday, when I was supposed to go to my third clinical, I had a sinus infection. It was a really bad sinus infection. I typically, when I get sick, I usually get sinus infections, and for some reason, this sinus infection that I got was like debilitating. It was just like one of the worst sinus infections I've ever had, ever. So yeah, I ended up getting sick, and I communicated with my clinical instructor and said, hey, I'm sick. I was like, I'll let you know how I feel by Saturday, you know, whether or not I'm gonna be able to go to clinical or not. I'll let you know how I feel. She was like, okay. So the whole week went by, and Saturday night, I was like, I still feel sick. So I contacted my clinical professor, or my clinical instructor, and I told her, I was like, hey, I'm still sick. She was like, okay. She's like, here's what I want you to do. She was like, I want you to go tomorrow to the hospital, the same time as clinical, with your uniform on and everything. She's like, I know. But she's basically, what I want you to do is I want you to go through the front entrance of the hospital and basically fail the entrance into the hospital. So basically, you know, because of COVID and because of the pandemic, when you go to a hospital as a visitor, or excuse me, even as an employee, they do a screening on you. So, you know, they take your temperature, and you have to check off if you have any symptoms. So she told me, she was like, I want you to go tomorrow to clinical. I know you're sick, but she was like, just go and I'll be there and I'll meet you at the front. And basically what I want you to do is to fail your screening into the hospital. And so I went to the screening and I had to check what symptoms I had. And of course I had a sinus infection. So I had a congestion and coughing and whatever other symptoms I had, and I checked them off. And basically I failed the screening into the hospital. And so I could not go to clinical. And so because I failed the screening, it was basically like an official way of saying that I could not attend clinical because I was sick, or because I failed the screening. And so this official like documentation of me being sick was what my instructor had to use and put on file. So after that, she basically signed off that I was not able to attend, and I went home, and she gave me instructions on basically some assignments that I was gonna have to do. So unfortunately I didn't get to go to my third clinical because I was sick, and instead I had to do some iHuman simulations, and I had to do some other assignments as well. And I had to send her the documentation of me completing the assignments so that I could get my check for doing clinicals. And so completing all of these different assignments, basically that was me completing a full clinical day. So at the end of the day, I still got my 48 hours of clinicals. So yeah, that was pretty much it. Those were my clinical experiences so far. I have clinicals next session right now. I don't have clinicals right now. I have clinicals next session, and I look forward to going back. I really do. Clinicals are really exciting and they're great. It's kind of nerve-wracking at first when you first go to clinicals and simulation and all that stuff, but once you get through it the first time, you know what to expect, and it just kind of becomes easy and you gradually become more confident. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. This is a very, very long video. Thank you so much for sticking through. Thank you guys so much for liking and subscribing. And as always, I will see you guys next time.